Daddy by Sylvia Plath. You do not do any more black shoe, in which I have lived like a fool for 30 years, poor and white, barely daring to breathe or chew. Daddy, I've had to kill you. You died before I had time. Marble heavy, a bag full of God, ghastly statue with one gray toe, big as a Frisco seal. And a head in the freakish Atlantic where it pours bean green over blue in the waters off beautiful Nauset, I used to pray to recover you. Ach du. In the German tongue, in the Polish town, scraped flat by the roller of wars, wars, wars. But the name of the town is common. My Pollock friend says there are a dozen or two, so I never could tell where you put your foot, your root. I never could talk to you. The tongue stuck in my jaw. It stuck in a barbed wire snare. Ich, 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 ich. I could hardly speak. I thought every German was you, and the language obscene. An engine, an engine, chuffing me off like a Jew to Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen. I began to talk like a Jew. I think I may well be a Jew. The snows of Tyrol, the clear beer of Vienna, are not very pure or true. With my gypsy ancestress and my weird luck, and my Tarok pack, I may be a bit of a Jew. I have always been scared of you, with your Luftwaffe, your gobbledygoo, and your neat mustache and your Aryan eye, bright blue. Panzerman, Panzerman, oh you. Not God, but a swastika, so black no sky could squeak through. Every woman adores a fascist, the boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. You stand at the blackboard, Daddy, in the pictures I have of you, a cleft in your chin instead of your foot, but no less a devil for that. No, not any less the black man who bit my pretty red heart in two. I was 10 when they buried you. At 20 I tried to die, and get back to you. I thought even the bones would do. But they pulled me out of the sack, and they stuck me together with glue, and then I knew what to do. I made a model of you, a man in black with a Mein Kampf look, and a love of the rack and the screw. And I said, I do, I do. So Daddy, I'm finally through. The black telephone's off at the root. The voices just can't worm through. If I've killed one man, I've killed two. The vampire who said he was you, and drank my blood for a year. 7 years, if you want to know. Daddy, you can lie back now. There's a stake in your fat black heart, and the villagers never liked you. They're dancing and stamping on you. They always knew it was you. Daddy, Daddy, you bastard, I'm through.
Okay, so in this detailed analysis of the poem, I will be addressing the first two questions of CRD, which is going to be highlighted in green, the what does the poem say section, and then in pink will be how does the poem say it. So this first stanza is really full of information. First off, she's immediately saying that whoever she's talking to isn't around anymore, with this repetition of the you do not do line. And then second, she's expressing that she really hates this person, calling him a black shoe, which black is typically a negative color, and she calls herself a foot. I have lived like a foot. And she's pretty much telling us that she's been forced to live beneath him, suffocated for 30 years, poor and white, because she wasn't able to make a living for herself. And she's paled because she hasn't been exposed to the world and the sun and life properly. Moreover, she's afraid to even breathe or sneeze around him, showing how scared she is. Then in the second stanza, now she's telling us she's wanted to kill him, so she hates her dad. She keeps going, saying even though she wanted to kill him, he died beforehand. So even though she didn't get the chance to kill him, she really wanted to. Not, a great relationship. Then these comparisons here are pretty interesting. First, she calls him a bag full of God, which I could actually see as a positive description, but considering how she hates her dad, I don't see it as this way. And maybe she's using this as a negative comparison, or maybe Plath views God in a negative sense, which is why she's calling her dad this. But then she continues to call him a ghastly statue with one gray toe big as a Frisco seal. So this ghastly statue shows us that he was hardened, he was like a statue. But then this gray toe big as a Frisco seal, I'm not frankly too sure what a Frisco seal is. Maybe it's a seal from San Francisco, but either way, the description of gray and big conveys a sense that he was just overbearing. Next, moving on to this next stanza, where it's a little different because it actually seems like she's calling him beautiful, because she compares him to the beautiful sights of the Atlantic, where it pours bean green over blue, and the beautiful Nauset. And it's really interesting because she says she used to pray to recover him. So this makes me think that he was sick, and what he died from earlier was probably this. And at some point, she actually used to love him, and she used to see him well. And I actually did search up this last line, "ach du," and it actually means "oh you" in German. So it actually kind of sounds kind of reminiscent and longing for her father, who she, even though she saw him negatively overall, she might still miss him. Then these next two stanzas I think are good to read together, which really helped me understand them. So let's look at them together. These two stanzas, it really sounds like she's talking about where her father came from, because this line right here, it says, in the German tongue, I could never really tell where you put your foot, your root. This was the biggest hint right here. Is she's talking about where he's from, his origin, and she doesn't know. And also, yeah, like I said, the German tongue and the Polish town shows that he was somewhere from Germany, or sorry, somewhere from Poland, and he speaks German. But this town was, ridden by warfare, and the name is pretty common because tons of Polish towns just had common names. And then this is where she cuts the sentence right here, but just says my Pollock friend says there's a dozen or two. Again, just saying how common the town was. And then she finishes off, I could never talk to you. Again, saying how she doesn't feel connected to her dad, and she was still afraid to talk to him. Her tongue was stuck in her jaw. Again, she's just afraid to talk to him. Then moving on to this next one, it kind of continues how she was afraid to talk to him, her tongue stuck in a barbed wire snare. And then I looked this up, and ich actually means I in German. I don't know if it's pronounced ich or ich, but it means I in German. So this line is actually saying, like, it's a stutter. I could hardly speak. She's stuttering because she can't get out what she wants to say to him. And then she thought every German was him and the language was obscene. So she really didn't feel connected to him. And she saw him as harsh and obscene, like all Germans in their language. Then, in this next stanza, she uses a really harsh simile where she says she's chuffed off, he's chuffing her off like a Jew to Dachau, a Jew to Auschwitz and Belsen. She's comparing her father to how the German Nazis oppressed the Jews. And she feels the oppression that Jews feel. She feels silenced and she feels crushed under the boot of the Germans because of that, she considers herself a Jew. Right here, she says, I began to talk like a Jew. I think I may well be a Jew. She feels this really strong, harsh oppression. Then, moving on to the next stanza, she's actually criticizing this idea of German racial purity, where she says the snows of Tyrol, the clear beer of Vienna are not very pure or true. These are German treasures that aren't even pure or even German. She then calls her ancestors here gypsies, and she talks about the Tarak pack, and I'm maybe a bit of a Jew. So the gypsies were also oppressed by the Germans, so she relates to them and the Jews, again calling back to that German Jewish kind of power struggle, I guess you could say. Then this next line right here is actually very interesting because the first line she talks directly to her father, which says, I have always been scared of you. This of you is her talking directly to her father. Even though he's dead, she's finally addressing him, and she's able to tell him that she's been scared of him. Here, she's kind of insulting him a little bit with your Luftwaffe and your gobbledygook. Luftwaffe was the German Air Force during World War II, so I guess she was kind of afraid of his militarism, or maybe he was even in the Air Force during World War II on the German side. But then gobbledygook is just straight up gibberish, so she's kind of insulting his language and saying none of him really made sense to her. Then she continues by describing him as what the Aryan perfection German ideal was, with a neat mustache, Aryan eye, bright blue. And again, she's just trying to tie him closely to the Nazis. And then a Panzerman was actually a German tank driver. So again, she's continuing this comparison to militarism and Nazism. Then she closes the stanza with OU, which I thought was very interesting because it kind of calls back to that German OU, but she says it in English this time. So maybe she's kind of renouncing her father's language and she sees it negatively now. So she doesn't see him reminiscently, but negatively. Now, to continue, she definitely clearly sees God as a negative here because she's comparing, he's not even as bad as God, but he's a swastika, right? And she's comparing God and him. So she sees God negatively for sure, but she sees her father as worse than this, a giant black swastika in the sky that you couldn't even see the sky because of how big the swastika was. Then right here, I kind of think it's sarcasm where she goes, every woman adores a fascist. I obviously don't think every woman adores a fascist. So I think there's a hint of sarcasm where she's kind of saying, oh, all women love fascists. They love brutish men, and that's what she's calling her dad. She's calling her dad a brute. And she's saying that he has, I really like this line, the boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. I just think it drills in that she thinks he's brutish, he's mean, he's tough. And again, the sarcasm just drills it. Then I think these next two stanzas should also be looked closely together because they made a lot more sense together. So these first two lines actually reveal that he was a professor of some sorts. He stands at the blackboard, which I think is typically a stereotypical, old teacher symbol. He's in an old picture teaching at a blackboard. But then she says, this part is really cool, a cleft chin instead of your foot, but no less a devil for that. And so the reason I think this is pretty cool is it calls to the devil. The devil is normally described as having cleft feet, an animal with cleft feet. So this is saying that instead of having cleft feet like the devil normally does, her father has a cleft chin. but this doesn't make any, less devilish within him. He's still the horrible man. And then she finishes this off by calling him the black man, who we know he's not like black skin. He's got white skin because she calls him the German perfection earlier. But she's kind of talking about on the inside, he's a black man. And then if we keep going, the black man who bit my pretty red heart in two. So she's saying he broke her heart. And this actually reveals a lot, that even though he was horrible and a largely brutish man, she still loved her father. And right here, I was 10 when they buried you. She was really young when he died. But at 20, I tried to die and get back to you. Right here, she's saying she loved him so much, she tried to kill herself because she thought, even in death, she could be with her dad. She wanted to get back to him, which, again, it's kind of interesting because this entire poem, she's saying how much she hates her father. But at one point in time, she did love him and she did want to be with her dad, even if it was in the afterlife. And then again, the next two stanzas are the most confusing in my opinion. So let's look at those two together as well, because it makes the most sense looking at them together. So she first tells us that she wanted to kill herself, but some of they pulled her out of the sack and fixed her up. And maybe they is just a general term, but right now I wasn't too sure. Then this part about the model doesn't make much sense, where it says, I made a model of you. It doesn't really make much sense to me, but if we keep reading, she says, like, if we clear, it'll clear things up in a second. So a man in black with a mind conflict and a love of the rack and screw. But here she says, and I said, I do. And that part really got me thinking, maybe she's marrying somebody. She is saying I do, she's marrying someone. And then if we go back up, I think this they is the man that she's marrying. Some lover pulled her out of this sack and they put her back together, with glue. And they're patching her back up. But then this I made a model of you, it makes me think that she married someone who's similar to her father, with this same, down here, the same black descriptor and the German kind of Nazi-ish descriptor that she used for her dad. And she's kind of playing on this idea like she married someone similar to her father, which is a little strange, but you know what? You do you. And then she continues that a love of the rack and screw. I think that, I'm not too sure, but I think that means that this guy likes torture or likes to torture. It's a little strange. Maybe he's insane or something. But yeah, they're just she's going for the really, he's a harsh, very similar to her dad kind of guy. Then, if we continue, she says, so daddy, I'm finally through. The black telephone's off at the root. The voices just can't warm through. And here she's just comparing her relationship with her dad to a phone. She says she's hanging it up and she's cutting off this relationship like it's a phone call. And I think these two stanzas combined really say that now that she's gone through her process and she's found a man, even though the man is like her father, she doesn't find the need to mourn her father anymore. But this, next stanza is her kind of taking the responsibility for killing her father. If I've killed one man, which is a little bit strange because earlier she claimed to have already killed him, but then contradicts herself and says a disease did. But this goes to show that she just feels responsible. And then this I've killed two, I think that means, because her husband is like her father, she's going to kill her husband the same way that she feels responsible for killing her father. Who then this husband is the vampire who said he was you. Again, they're kind of got this vampire motif that's starting right here. But again, it's just saying like this husband was like her dad who said he was you. And then he drank her blood for a year, just saying he kind of sucked the life out of her. Her husband drained the life out of her like a vampire drains the blood out of somebody. And then she says like a year, but I guess she was married for 7 years, which is how long she was married to her husband before he might have died, I guess, or before she feels that she killed him. But then I think this last part with Daddy, you can lie back now is saying, now that part of him that was alive within her and her husband can finally die because her husband's not around, or maybe she's free of him or something. And this actually sounds a lot like the end of the poem, and it seems very conclusive. But there's still this last stanza. So taking a look at this last stanza starts off by comparing her father to a vampire, similar to how she compared her husband. There's a stake in your fat black heart, which is, how vampires should be killed, a stake through the heart. And it just continues this parallel, this motif of her husband and her father being similar, and this vampire, motif. But then this part about the villagers, with the villagers never liked you. They're always dancing and stamping on you, and they always knew it was you. This part makes me think, she's saying the villagers didn't like him. They danced on him. They knew it was him. And it feels like she's saying others knew. Others around them knew that her father was different and horrible. And this italicized knew right here sounds really accusatory. And I feel this ending feels that after this angry moment, she's finally come to terms with her dad's death. You bastard, I'm through. She's finally come to terms with his death, and now he's truly dead, and that's the end of the poem. So I think that definitely covers the first two questions of Ciardi with the what does the poem say? She's definitely the speaker. She's mad at her father, and she marries someone like her father, and this is just her poem getting over it. And then the how does this poem say it? There's a lot of really strong diction and lots of comparisons, but it's very harsh with its descriptors of her father. And it's also very harsh with the descriptors of her husband and what she went through. And it's super, there's lots of raw emotion in there. And I think you can definitely feel that. But the third question is, what does this poem say to me? I frankly don't think I can relate to this poem, to my life specifically. I don't really hate my dad like this, and I don't think I want to kill him, and I don't plan on marrying someone like my dad. But the emotion here is definitely understandable. She's angry and hurt by her father, who she looked up to at one point. And Plath draws in so much emotion about how she felt betrayed, and this ruined her. And because of this harsh betrayal and such horrible treatment, she hated her father for the man that he was. And that kind of raw anger is definitely understandable. And, it says a lot about this. So thank you, and that's my poem analysis.